Hello everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In the last episode, the Queen Mother made me feel exhausted with all her tours and traveling. She was in France, she was in Rhodesia, she was back in France, and lastly, she made a long journey to New Zealand and Australia. The last destination was jam-packed with programs for her to be at. She ended up getting the flu again, but she pushed on. In a letter, the Queen Mother stated that she was just hanging on the tour, so packed that there was hardly any time for breathing. But luckily the weather was lovely and one feels revived. She found loyalty to the crown and to Britain burning. She was mad to think that English papers weren't covering her efforts, but that wasn't true. The British press followed her tour extensively, and both her daughters told her that. Princess Margaret wrote, "We see nothing but delicious, hot, sunny photographs of you with millions and millions of people waving. I can almost hear the exhausting noise." Counterbalancing that, Queen Elizabeth wrote to her unmarried daughter that on a sheep station she met the owner's very beautiful nephews, all called Bill. The real country Australian is a knockout, very tall with long legs encased in tight trousers, blue eyes, a drawl, and a Stetson. They're too charming for words, and the American cowboy is a mere nothing compared. Sydney, she said, was another matter. The city, she stated, nearly killed me. The organizers kept sliding in new events on one morning, and she had 3 children's rallies in boiling sun, then visits to a factory and a housing estate, followed by a garden party. After that, she had to give out presents to people who had helped with the tour. She didn't like this ritual because it was, as she said, always at the end of a busy day, and one gradually thanks them less and less until the poor deputy transport officer gets a mere whisper. She had a memorable day between going to 2 towns. She had to fit in both Hobart, the capital of Tasmania, and Launceston, 100 miles away. On a day trip there by air from Melbourne, her entourage was apprehensive, but the Queen Mother found it hilarious. She said, "I went to Tasmania for lunch yesterday. That's the form. It was a gloriously crazy day, and I haven't laughed so much for years. First of all, we arrived in a howling gale, which is always faintly funny. Sir Ronald Cross had an ADC from the Grenadiers who was having trouble with a huge bearskin, and I thought he had gone mad when he conducted me firmly to the back of the guard of honor, and I had visions of inspecting their backs, when on a word of command they revolved, and we faced each other bravely. Then, on the arrival at their house, there was drawn up a lot of nurses, army nurses, to inspect. As they started down the line, a particularly vicious blast took all their hats off, and being round and flat, they rolled away like little bicycles. Then the public address system broke down when I was making my very boring speech, and then we had a mad chauffeur who obediently slowed down on approaching a group of people, and then accelerated violently when passing them, so all the poor thing saw was a pair of white shoes as I was thrown back against the seat, and my feet shot into the air. Let's hope that they thought they saw little white hands waving." There was some days off, and she found her relaxation visiting studs or going to the races. Early in the trip around New Zealand at Trentham Race Course near Wellington, she presented the St. James Cup to Sir Ernest Davies, a colorful businessman and a former mayor of Auckland, whose horse Bally High had just won. The Queen wrote to her astonishment. He roared up to the microphone and announced that he wanted to give her the horse as a present from all the sports people of New Zealand. "You can imagine my feelings," she wrote to the Queen, "and at once I thought of you and Margaret, saying, 'What has Mummy done now?'" And she also wrote to her trainer, Cecil Boyd Rochford, asking him to take the gift horse into a stable. In the event, Bally High was an excellent horse and raced well for her after he arrived in England. Till the end, there were more civic ceremonies, more mayoral receptions, more awards to be given, parades of ambulance workers, tours of housing projects, inspections of factories, more garden parties, further civic receptions, meetings of youth organizations, and attendance at a school children's rally in Perth. Friday, March the 7th, Queen Elizabeth left on one of Qantas's best planes, a super constellation named Southern Star, bound for London. She was happy with her tour and was looking forward to dinner with her family on Monday night. She never liked being alone on the evening she returned from a trip. Then something happened that wasn't counted on. They were refueling in the Cocos Islands without incident, but 2 hours before arriving in Mauritius for another fueling, a cylinder seized in one of the plane's 4 engines. Serious damage was caused. Cyclones in the Mauritius area added to anxiety about a safe landing. To everyone's relief, they made it to Plaisance Airport, but then the engine's cowling needed to be replaced. The 1-hour stop had to be extended, and they ended up having to spend 3 nights there. The weather was horrible, airless and steamy, with crackling violent electrical storms or pouring rain. Queen Elizabeth made the best of her enforced holiday, and the governor came up with an impromptu program, and she was cheered by crowds of delighted Meridians wherever she went. She was offered another aircraft to continue, but knowing how upset her Qantas crew and their superiors back home already were, she said she preferred to stay with her Qantas flight. March 11th, after a new cowling had eventually arrived from Australia, she flew away, church bells pealing, people shouting farewells as she waved goodbye from the steps of the plane. Her greatest concern was for Kenya, where she had been scheduled to open Nairobi's new airport during another stopover. The delays made this impossible, and she sent a message to the governor of Kenya saying how sad she was about this, but expressing confidence that on another voyage, which I hope will not be too far in the future, my aircraft will land at your new airport. And this happened 1 year later. Instead of Nairobi, her plane was routed by Entebbe, where she landed in the middle of the night. Once again, engine trouble caused a delay when it was supposed to be a refueling stop. She was offered another aircraft but declined. Thinking of this myself, I would have gotten another plane when it happened the second time. 18 hours late, they took off for Malta, and she was almost home, but even here there was trouble and another delay of at least 12 hours. Finally, she agreed to transfer to a BOAC plane and completed the journey to London, landing March the 13th, 68 hours late. When the unhappy Qantas manager in London apologized, she reassured him. It could have happened to anyone, she said. I feel very sorry for the crew. They all worked so hard. The Queen Mother saw the delays as more of an adventure than as a setback, and this made me think of my own mother. So whenever something happened to a plan that we would have, she would say that things happen for a reason, and it may have saved our lives. So that was a good way to look at things, and the Queen Mother had that same mentality. The Queen Mother was happy with her trip. In one letter she wrote, I have been deeply touched by their very true feelings of love and amazed at their enthusiastic reception. The Queen Mother was becoming an avid traveler. She had enjoyed flying since her first flight in 1935, and she loved to be the royal family's pioneer in the air. She was one of the first in the family to fly by helicopter, and she loved it. It became a method of transport she enjoyed till the very end of her life. She was also gaining confidence in her own ability to represent her country abroad. She was widely visible in Africa, as what Harold Macmillan later called the winds of change swept through the continent. It was removing British colonial rule. Ghana was the first African colony to become independent in 1957, and it was followed by Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Nyasaland, which became Malawi, and northern Rhodesia, Zambia, throughout the 1960s. All became members of the British Commonwealth. Its growth, as the Queen herself later said, marked the transformation of the crown from an emblem of dominion into a symbol of free and voluntary association. In all history, this has no precedent. Early in 1959, Queen Elizabeth made an official tour to Kenya and Uganda. It was nostalgic for her, the first time she had been to Kenya since she and the Duke of York had been there in 1924 and 1925. The visit was arranged partly to make up for the previous year's canceled visit to open Nairobi Airport. It was almost canceled again because of the political unrest in the country. The African elected members of the Kenya Legislative Council decided to boycott any official functions during the visit, but their leader, Dr. Kiano, sent Queen Elizabeth a personal message assuring her of their esteem for her and the royal family. The authorities in Nairobi were unworried and persuaded the Colonial Office that cancellation was unnecessary. She was met at the airport that afternoon of February the 5th by the governor of Kenya, Sir Evelyn Baring, and his wife Molly. The governor had come up with a sophisticated program for her, and his efficient staff guided her with care around the country. East Africa at this time had been suffering a serious drought, but soon after she arrived in almost waterless Mazi district of Narok, there were Mazi tribesmen, some in lion-skin headdresses. Queen Elizabeth made a speech expressing a hope for rain. An hour later, the skies opened, and an inch of rain fell in 20 minutes. And this was recorded by her ladies-in-waiting. The Mazi were convinced that HM had magical powers, and Princess Margaret congratulated her on being a Rainmaker. She said the BBC man read it out quite seriously and deadpan, which made it sound even more unbelievable. It reminded me so much of when Papa said Pula in Bechuanaland, and that worked too. So I will end the video here. We saw how the Queen Mother relished her role as a royal pioneer and traveling around the world. She loved the people she saw in Australia, and the only hiccup in her journey was when the plane she was traveling in on the way back to London kept breaking down. She made her way home safely, but many days later. Next, the Queen Mother returned to Africa in order to open the Nairobi airport, which she was supposed to have done the year before. The trip was almost canceled because of political unrest, but the people there guaranteed she would be safe. The best part was when she made a speech expressing a need for rain, and her request was granted an hour later when there was an inch of rain in 20 minutes' time. The people there felt she had magical powers. It amused Princess Margaret when she heard the news. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated as always, and it will help me to keep the channel growing. And as I have mentioned before, I created a list of merchandise from Amazon that I thought you might be interested in. If you click on the link, it takes you to the Amazon page, and if you purchase anything, I get a small commission that is of no extra cost to you. But more importantly, I want to wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you.